This is Joel Markowitz from DCTheaterscene.com. I'm here at Arena Stage with Tim Acito, who has written the score, the lyrics, the book, has co-written the orchestrations, and arranged the vocals for the Women of Brewster Place. Thanks for being here, Tim.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Are you ready for press night on Friday?
We will be. Come Friday, we have a couple of more days of rehearsal and a couple of more previews, and we're still making some good final changes.
How does one go from being a professional dancer to becoming a composer of musicals?
I wish I knew. It sort of happened gradually and sort of subconsciously. I had always loved music. I grew up loving music. My father was and still is a Dixieland jazz pianist, and I studied classical piano. And then in my 20s, I fell in love with contemporary American poetry. So by the time I hit around 30, while I had always liked theater, my passions were basically poetry, music, and dance. And then after living out of a suitcase as a dancer for about 6 years, I was tired and my body was really broken down, and I wanted to find other forms of artistic expression. And I thought, maybe writing for theater would be a way that I could use poetry and music and dance and just sort of throw them into a blender, and voila, I'd have theater. And as we all know, it's a lot more complicated than that. So what I thought I would do was apply to straight playwriting programs, because I thought that would give me the best training. And so I wrote a straight play and fooled Yale into accepting me. So
and what was it called?
That masterpiece was called King of Light Toadies, and it was actually based on on my experiences as in a small modern dance company. But then, I never intended to write musicals, but every play I started to write in grad school, at some point the characters inevitably broke out into song. So I, figured that maybe that's telling me something. And ever since then, I'm still, I guess, like all musical theater writers, you sort of start from scratch every single musical, because every musical has its own rules that you have to discover and own rules that you have to conquer.
Okay, what was it about the Women of Brewster Place that made you decide to buy the stage rights and turn it into a musical?
First and foremost, I think there was just an inherent musicality to the source material. I think it addresses colossal themes about class and race and gender and sexuality and violence, but as critical as those themes are, especially in today's world, it would have been a foolish undertaking to turn it into a musical if I didn't feel like there was inherently music within the source. And I think Gloria Naylor's writing is so musical in its cadences, in its word choice, in its rhythms, in its variety. Sometimes it's just beautifully understated in its lyricism, and sometimes it's just so percussive in its brutality that it made for it gave such a wide palette from which to create music. And fortunately, again, all these other Shakespearean themes were already present, so I knew that it still is an important work of literature, but the trick to turning into a musical was just realizing that there is, in fact, music within it.
Okay, did the rights holder, was it Gloria Naylor, like the idea of a musical right away?
I think she was intrigued, and I think she was a little perplexed, to be honest with you. The first question she asked me was, I just don't get how this is going to be turned into a musical. So fortunately, I was already thinking about it because I love the novel so much, and was able to share with her a couple of ideas to start to share with her how this could be turned into a musical. And I think she, obviously she was comforted enough to graciously allow us to go forward with our project.
Okay, how long did it take to decide which portions of the novel to musicalize, and what was that process like?
Because the novel, again, I feel is so musical, to me, the musical portions practically jumped off the page. So, for instance, maybe I bet the first time that I sat down and said, all right, let me try to find the songs, I bet I was able to find at least 15 songs that are still in the show today within a couple of hours. And that's just a testament to her writing. Now, of course, like a lot of things, you can get the idea within a couple of hours, and then it takes a year or two to actually fully realize that idea and perfect it. But it's also a very arbitrary process, because where I feel the music may lie may not be where other people do. I tend to look for not only dramatic situation and the emotional high points, but I'm also very sensitive to the language. And so I always use the example of in the scene between Kiswana Brown and her mother, when Kiswana is a young revolutionary who has sort of lost touch with her family roots and ends up saying some things that are very insulting to her mother. And so the mother grabs her by the arm and just says, "Then know this." And she goes into explaining some of part of the family history that Kiswana has forgotten about how powerful her grandmother and grandparents were. And just that phrase, "then know this," it's so simple, and yet it's also so powerful. It's so percussive. It's so direct. As they say, monosyllables are a poet's gold. And "then know this" is just, you can hear the drums beating within it.
Have you ever written the score, lyrics, and book, and written the orchestrations and arranged the vocals before for the same show?
Not for the same show. I've sort of done each of those things in various projects, but this time is the first that we're doing it all. And again, it just comes from such a deep place of passion for me for the novel, and all of those things to me are extensions of the other. There's no separation between them.
Well, did you ever consider taking on a collaborator to write the book?
I'm always open to that, but in this case, there's just something inside me that says I've connected with this novel, or this novel has connected with me in such a profound way from the very first time that I read it, that my gut was telling me to go ahead and try to do it myself.
Okay, how did you and Molly Smith get together? Did you find Molly, or did she find you?
Actually, Mark Bly sort of put us together. Mark Bly was my department head in grad school, who now is the senior dramaturg at
Where did you go to school?
Arena Stage. This is the Yale School of Drama. And Mark Bly was the head of the playwriting program when I was there. And he knew that Molly was looking for a new musical to develop, and he had heard through the grapevine that I was working on the Women of Brewster Place, and he knew that Molly was very interested in doing something quintessentially American, and he knew that both Molly and Arena Stage in general have a mission to do theater that is sociopolitically provocative and that will address a wide demographic and bring in as many people as possible, particularly both on the very local level, addressing themes and issues that are relevant to the D.C. area, but also on a national level as well.
What were you doing in 1975, the same year that the Women of Brewster Place takes place, and what kind of music and which singers and composers were you listening to?
That's what, thinking about it right now, the show opens in the summer of 75, and that's a lyric in the opening number. And in the summer of 75, I have very fond memories of piling into a huge Vista Cruiser station wagon with our neighbors, all 8 or 10 of us shoved into a station wagon and driving to the beach listening to AM radio, because back then AM radio played music. And what was so wonderful was that you could go from, say, Olivia Newton-John ballad to, a hardcore Parliament Funkadelic song to be followed by a Dolly Parton country western song to be followed by, a Gloria Gaynor disco extravaganza. And I only half jokingly say that no matter where or when my musicals takes place, musically it's always 1973, or in this case 1975, because it's just such a rich period musically. And again, relating it to the Women of Brewster Place, when the novel is addressing the private interior thoughts of a character, I try to channel people like Roberta Flack or Marilyn McCoo or Diana Ross. And then when it's in a more raucous group setting, that's when I try to channel people like Curtis Mayfield or Parliament Funkadelic or some of the more raucous funk and R&B bands back then.
Well, are there any songs that were in the Atlanta Alliance Theater production that are not or have been added to the Arena Stage production?
Yes, I guess there were 2. We replaced the opening number, and we also replaced one of the solos, Fu Lucilia. And in addition, we did several internal trims of songs. So if a song was, say, 3.5 minutes, now it might be just 3 minutes or 2:45. So we trimmed probably a good 4 minutes off the score just by trimming songs internally.
Well, you have the difficult task of introducing 10 characters to the audience so that they know who these women are, where they come from, what hardships they have endured, and where they are at that point in their lives when the story of the show begins. How important is the opening number, and how many opening numbers have you written for the show?
The knee-jerk reaction is to say, well, of course the opening number is critical, and in many ways it is. But then again, you think of a show like Gypsy, which doesn't really have an opening number, and
although that overture is quite good.
The overture is great, but it takes a while for the first real sung song to kick in, and similarly, Avenue Q starts very, very quietly, very softly, and in a way that doesn't quite let you know what's coming, which is sort of wonderful about it. The opening number can serve several different functions. It could either immediately set the story in motion. For instance, in Into the Woods, you try to. I think they basically establish the three main stories, or you have something like Chicago or the Fugue for Tin Horns from Guys and Dolls, which don't basically have anything specifically to do with the plot, but are very important in establishing the atmosphere of the show. We try to go somewhere in between those two. So we definitely have, The End of the Line is the name of the opening number now, which definitely establishes the musical world. You'll get to hear the sort of the deep funky undercurrent that's going to inform a lot of the songs. You'll also hear a certain chord progression that actually appears in many songs in different guises. And for any musicologists out there looking for some trivia, that chord progression actually starts with the minor tonic, and then travels up to a major third, the major fourth, and the major fifth. And what's interesting about that is that 3 of those 4 chords are major, and yet because the first chord is minor, it creates a more ominous tone, and that's sort of this interesting balance of dark and light that informs the whole piece. That it's at times very funny and very celebratory, and at other times it's utterly brutal. So we establish the musical word of the play, and we also very specifically but very briefly introduce 6 of the main characters and what they're fighting for, but then we also leave some of them. We sort of plant the seed, and then it's left in the audience's minds to ponder how that's going to come back and come to fruition.
Okay, Irving Berlin used to write songs specifically for stars like Ethel Merman. When you wrote This Ain't a Prayer, which I really love in the show,
thank you.
Did you have a particular star in mind?
I didn't at all. When I first wrote this, I just assumed no one's ever going to do this. It's just going to sit in my drawer, but it was just it was a labor of love. It was something that existentially I just felt I needed to do, whether or not anyone was ever going to produce it. So I didn't really have anyone in mind in particular for these songs. I knew, or I dreamt, that the person would have a voice that could be both very understated and lyrical, and also could just blast the back wall of the theater down when you needed to.
Which Tina Fabric
does. Which Tina can do extremely well.
Okay, could you set up the song for our listeners?
Yes, this is the end of Act 1, where I won't say specifically what tragedy happens, but there is a tragedy that happens by the end of Act 1, and Maddie, the lead character, has basically had it with God, and she's a very devout person who has suffered greatly throughout her life and has always remained a deep faith and a very personal connection with God, almost a chatty relationship with God. But by the end of Act 1, she feels like she and the people around her have just suffered too much, and basically it's a call to war, and says we're not going to accept this anymore, and they take matters into their own hands.
What was the toughest song to write for the score, and why?
Speaking of This Ain't a Prayer, I think that the ending half of the song, it's a long song, it's a 6-minute song. The first 3 minutes are very powerful and loud. It sort of almost feels like a something between maybe a dark church hymn and a Led Zeppelin concert. But then the last 3 minutes become almost this Zen-like chanting and this overlapping of vocals. It was that last 3 minutes that was difficult to write, because there's a beautiful passage in the novel invoking images of suffering throughout history, about the blood of Dachau's laboratory floors, and talking about in the novel, it's the brains of the Senegalese infants who had been smashed against the slave ships because their mothers didn't want them to become slaves. So just that, I still get chills thinking about Gloria Naylor's paragraph there. And for a while I was very scared to try to tackle it because it's just so colossal. But I also knew that it was so powerful that we had to at least give it a shot. So that section was very difficult to write.
It reminds me a lot of Lot's wife from Carolina Change. It has that power.
Oh, interesting. Oh, well, thank you for that comparison. And then on a slightly different note, we also joke that, and it's not a joke, it's a fact, that every single time we've had a workshop, I cut all of Lucilia's solos and I write her new ones, and then she learns them for a week, and then we cut all of them and I write new ones for her. So Lucilia has probably had at least 10 solos written for her now, and now there exists maybe 1.5. She's been the toughest character to write for.
I hope you froze her songs finally before press night.
We did, and thank goodness for Shelley Thomas, who just is so professional and learns music so quickly that we knew that we could keep working on her material because she just absorbs it so quickly. But yeah, we're pretty sure right now we're in a pretty good place.
Okay, so what song makes you say, "Boy, that's damn good" every time you hear it sung on the show?
Oh, well, I don't quite say that, but I do have to. If I had to choose one song that's probably closest to my heart, it would be "The Saying a Prayer," just because I think it's encompasses so many of the themes of the show, and also within that one song shows you a good idea of the variety of music, that sometimes it's meant to blow the rafters off the theater, and then it also is meant to be utterly quiet.
So what's next for you?
I have no idea, to be honest with you. I'm certainly not at a stage in my career where I get to choose what I do next. It's going to be largely, I think, what whoever out there might decide to choose me to work with. I think I would love to stay in the field of musical theater, but it's also, as we all know, a very difficult field to survive in. And they say it takes 5 years for a musical to get produced, from the time you start writing it to the time it gets produced. And to keep a roof over your head during the interim can be very challenging. But for now, I would be very happy if I could continue to create musical theater.
What do you want Washington audiences to take away with them when they leave the Krieger Theater after watching and experiencing the Women of Brewster Plays?
I would like them to feel inspired to create change. And I also would love people to realize that we each as individuals need to examine ourselves to see what walls we have within ourselves that need to be torn down before we can go out and tear down external walls.